The plan to get the Philadelphia Eagles back where they believe they belong did not start this week at the NFL Scouting Combine, and it didn't start at the end of last season. According to In the World of Howie Roseman, preparations for the 2026 season began as far back as September of 2025, when the college scouts were already on the road evaluating prospects and building the foundation for what comes next. That's how far ahead this front office is thinking. And now, standing at the Combine with the entire Eagles contingent watching workouts and conducting critical interviews, the long-term vision is meeting the present moment. Free agency opens in 2 weeks. The NFL draft follows 5 weeks after that. This is the stretch where decisions define the next phase of the roster, and Roseman has made it very clear what the philosophy is. From a big picture perspective, the objective is not to win headlines in March. The objective is to build a team that has a chance to compete for championships every single year. That means drafting well. That means signing their own players. That means being selective, even restrained in free agency. As Roseman explained, the Eagles want to draft, develop, and re-sign. They want continuity. They want to keep the core intact. But here's the reality he acknowledged. They cannot keep everyone. There are key defensive players coming off rookie deals over the next few years. Choices will have to be made, and every choice comes with a trade-off. If they commit major money internally, flexibility externally becomes limited. If they chase a splash move outside the building, it could cost them the ability to retain someone they already know, trust, and believe in culturally. This is where the layer cake analogy comes in. Roseman described building the roster like stacking layers, keeping the young, really good players they live with every day, understand as people, and trust as professionals. Then adding more strong draft picks on top, then repeating the cycle. It's not flashy, it's not always dramatic, but it's sustainable. And sustainability is the key word here. Over the last few years, the Eagles have drafted players they believe can anchor the next era. According to the file, Roseman pointed out that over a 2-year period, unless they made major subtractive moves, it would be hard to create cap room for massive splash signings because they genuinely like the players they've drafted and envision them as central pieces moving forward. That brings us directly to the 2025 rookie class, a group the organization expects to take a significant step forward in 2026. Roseman expressed strong confidence in that class, while also reminding everyone that development isn't always immediate. Some recent rookie classes made instant impacts, but historically, growth is part of the process. Year 1 to year 2 jumps matter, especially for certain players. Take Jahad Campbell, the first-round pick in 2025. Roseman described him as an incredibly talented, hard-working, high-character player with tremendous potential. His situation was unique because of the depth at the linebacker position, but the belief in his upside is very real inside the building. Then there's safety Drew Makuba, who dealt with injury, something Roseman admitted hurt the team because he was a player they were counting on. Injuries can stall momentum, but internally, that belief doesn't disappear. And here's where it gets even more interesting: the day 3 picks. Roseman emphasized that the year 1 to year 2 leap for day 3 players can be even more important than it is for early round selections. Why? Because the day 1 and day 2 players often get attention immediately due to playing time, but day 3 players must be developed deliberately. They have talent in their bodies. The coaching staff now has the responsibility to unlock it. The expectation inside the organization is that those players increase their roles in 2026. So when you step back and look at this entire approach, what you're seeing is not a franchise chasing noise. You're seeing a front office doubling down on identity. Keep as many top-level players as possible. Continue to win in the draft. Be smart, not impulsive, and for worse, in free agency. Develop the entire roster from top to bottom. Now we're entering the phase where vision turns into action. The combine is happening. Free agency is around the corner. The draft is 5 weeks away. The puzzle pieces are about to move. And for fans who have been waiting since January, this is where the picture of the 2026 Eagles truly begins to form. The organization believes it has a foundation worth preserving. It believes growth is coming from within. It believes disciplined roster building, even if it's not flashy, and is the path back to competing at the highest level year after year. But here's the real question for you, knowing that keeping their own core may limit big outside moves. Do you agree with this patient, draft and develop strategy, or do you think the Eagles should push harder for a splash in free agency this offseason? And this is where the conversation gets even more interesting, because patience in the NFL is not always easy to sell, especially to a fan base that expects to compete at the highest highest level every single season. The approach that Howie Roseman laid out is rooted in long-term stability, but long-term stability requires short-term discipline, and discipline sometimes means watching other teams make aggressive free agency moves while you stay selective. According to the plan detailed in the file, the Eagles understand that keeping their own players, especially young, ascending defensive talent coming off rookie contracts, will naturally tighten financial flexibility. That's not an accident. That's a conscious choice. When Roseman talks about trade-offs, he's not speaking hypothetically. Every dollar allocated internally is a dollar that cannot be spent externally. Every extension given to a homegrown player narrows the margin for a splash signing. But here's the key. The Eagles value familiarity. They value knowing who their players are as professionals and as people. That matters inside a locker room. That matters when you're trying to maintain culture. When Roseman says they live with these players and know who they are, that's a critical part of this philosophy. It's not just about production on Sundays. It's about consistency, accountability, and continuity from year to year. The emphasis on drafting well cannot be overstated. The scouting department has been working on the 2026 vision since September of 2025. That's months of evaluations, reports, background work, and projection. Now, at the Combine, the final layers of information are being gathered, and workouts, interviews, medicals, all feeding into a board that is designed not just for immediate impact, but for sustainability over multiple seasons. And that sustainability ties directly into the development conversation. Roseman openly acknowledged that while some recent rookie classes made immediate impacts, growth is often gradual. The organization is not panicking if every rookie does not dominate in year one. In fact, the expectation is that progression from year one to year two will define how strong this roster becomes in 2026. Jahad Campbell was described as incredibly talented and high character, with rare potential. The depth at linebacker created a unique situation for him, but internally the belief remains firm. That's a player the Eagles clearly view as part of the foundation layer in this layer cake structure. Drew Makuba's injury was a setback, especially because the team was counting on him, but injuries are part of the league. The key now is recovery and readiness moving forward. When Roseman speaks about counting on players to increase their roles, it's not casual optimism, it's expectation. Then come the day three players, and this is where development becomes crucial. Roseman emphasized that these players have talent in their bodies. The responsibility shifts to coaching, to strength and conditioning, to film study, to repetition. Year two for those players may quietly determine whether this draft and develop model continues to pay off. Because if those later round picks become reliable contributors, it strengthens the roster without requiring outside spending. And that's the heart of this strategy. Internal growth reduces external dependency. Now, that doesn't mean splash moves are impossible. Roseman was clear. That doesn't mean we can't do splashy things. But those moves have to fit the broader vision. They cannot compromise the ability to retain core players. They cannot disrupt the layering process. So as we sit here on the edge of free agency and just weeks away from the draft, what you're watching unfold isn't randomness. It's a calculated plan that has been in motion for months. The Eagles believe they already have a strong base. They believe development will elevate that base. They believe smart drafting will replenish it. And they believe disciplined free agency will complement it, not define it. The coming weeks will reveal how tightly they stick to that blueprint. Will they make a measured addition that fits seamlessly? Will they prioritize extensions? Will they trust their young players to take that leap? That's what makes this stretch so compelling. The vision is clear. The philosophy has been stated. Now execution takes center stage. If this approach works the way they intend, it creates a roster capable of competing not just in 2026, but consistently beyond that. But if growth stalls or key decisions don't hit, the pressure will only intensify. Because here's what it ultimately comes down to: conviction. Not just from the front office, but from the entire organization. When Howie Roseman outlines a philosophy this clearly, he's not leaving much room for interpretation. The Eagles believe in their structure, they believe in the layers they've already built, and they believe the next jump comes from refinement, not overhaul. Think about the timeline again. Preparations for 2026 began in September of 2025. Scouts on the road, reports stacking up, evaluations being debated internally. That is months of groundwork before the public even starts talking about free agency or the draft. It shows you this is not reactionary management, this is long-range planning. Now we are in the execution execution phase. The combine is where medical evaluations get finalized, where interviews reveal character and football intelligence, where the board begins to crystallize. Free agency is close, but based on everything laid out, the Eagles are not approaching it as a shopping spree. They're approaching it as selective reinforcement, and that's important for expectations. If a big-name player hits the market, it doesn't automatically mean Philadelphia will jump in. The internal calculus is more complex than that. Does the move align financially with upcoming extensions? Does it fit culturally? Does it block the development of a young player they believe in? Every question ties back to the same theme: sustainability. The most revealing part of this entire approach might be the emphasis on year 2 growth. That tells you a lot about how confident they are in their evaluations. Jahad Campbell wasn't drafted to be a short-term experiment. He was drafted because they see long-term value. Drew Makuba wasn't viewed as depth. He was someone they were counting on before injury disrupted things. And the day 3 players, they're not afterthoughts, they're developmental investments. When Roseman talks about those later round players having talent in their bodies, that's a strong statement. It means the organization believes the raw tools are there. The next step is unlocking consistency and expanding roles. If even a few of those players take meaningful leaps, the roster suddenly feels deeper and more dynamic, and without spending aggressively outside the building. And that's the quiet power of this model. It relies on internal wins: draft well, develop correctly, extend wisely, add selectively. It may not dominate headlines, but if it works, it creates something far more valuable than off-season buzz. It creates year-to-year competitiveness, the kind where you're not resetting every 2 seasons, the kind where the locker room identity stays intact, the kind where players grow within the same system and expectations remain stable. But here's the reality: this strategy requires patience from fans too. It requires understanding that not every March will bring fireworks. It requires trusting that the front office sees the long arc, not just the next transaction. Over the next few weeks, you're going to see decisions that either reinforce this philosophy or test it. Extensions could signal long-term commitment to the current core. Modest free agency moves could highlight confidence in youth. Draft positioning will reveal how aggressively they target specific needs. And when the dust settles, the 2026 Eagles will reflect whether this vision held firm under pressure, because that's the moment we're approaching, when philosophy meets reality. If the internal growth happens the way they expect, this team could look stronger, deeper, and more cohesive than many anticipate. If it doesn't, critics will question whether restraint cost them opportunities. That tension is what makes this offseason so pivotal. And there's another layer to this that deserves attention: accountability inside the building. When you commit to drafting, developing, and re-signing your own players, you're placing enormous pressure on your evaluations. You're essentially saying, we trust what we see, we trust what we've built, we